The fluorescent lights in the lawyer's conference room buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in that flat, institutional glow that makes grief look worse than it already is. I sat with my hands folded on the table, my brother beside me smelling like he'd driven straight from a poker game, which he probably had. My sister-in-law picked invisible lint from her blazer. My parents stared straight ahead like this was a court appearance they'd been subpoenaed to, not a reading of the will of the man who had raised me just as much as they had. My uncle had died 11 days earlier, quietly, the way he'd lived. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning in the garage he'd owned for 31 years, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and the sound of a radio playing classic rock. The paramedics said he probably hadn't suffered. I chose to believe that. Mr. Aldridge, the attorney, was a compact man in his 60s with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. He cleared his throat twice before he began. To my nephew, Derek, I leave my personal truck and the tools in the secondary bay. To my sister, Patricia, and her husband, I leave the vacation property in Lake Charles and the sum of $20,000. And to my niece, Claire Marie Hutchins, I leave the entirety of Hutchins Auto, including the building, the equipment, the business accounts, and the adjoining lot at 318 Beaumont Road, along with my primary savings, totaling $243,000. The room didn't go silent so much as it went still. Then my brother laughed. Not a real laugh. The short, disbelieving kind, that's really just a warning shot. There has to be a mistake, my mother said. Mr. Aldridge pushed his glasses up. There is no mistake, Mrs. Hutchins. The will is very clearly written and was signed 8 months ago in this office with 2 witnesses present. My father turned to me slowly, like a dial being turned to a frequency he didn't want to find. Did you know about this? No, I said. I didn't. That was true. My uncle had never mentioned it. Not once in 11 years of Sunday dinners, of me stopping by the garage on my lunch breaks, of sitting with him through 2 rounds of chemotherapy 4 years ago when he told everyone else he just had a bad flu. My brother leaned forward with his elbows on the table. That shop is a family business. It has our last name on it. You can't just hand it to her and cut everyone else out. He did exactly that, Mr. Aldridge said pleasantly. She doesn't even know how to run a business, my sister-in-law said. She's a nurse. She works nights. I work days now, I said. But I didn't think that was the point. My father put his hand flat on the table the way he did when he was deciding something. Claire, your brother needs this. You know the situation he's in. The shop would give him something stable, something to build on. You have a career. You have your life sorted out. Derek needs this more than you do. And there it was. I had heard variations of that sentence my entire life. Derek needs this more. Derek is going through something. Be the bigger person. Claire, you're the responsible one. You can handle it. I was the responsible one when I was 9 years old, and my brother broke the living room window, and I didn't tell because I knew he'd get grounded and miss his baseball tournament. I was the responsible one at 17, when I gave him half my graduation money because he'd lost his at a card game and was too ashamed to ask our parents. I was the responsible one at 26 when he called me at 2 in the morning from a gas station 3 states away, and I drove 4 hours to bring him home without telling anyone. And every single time, the reward for being responsible was simply being asked to do it again. My uncle had seen that. He'd watched it for years from the outside, the way you can sometimes see a family's patterns more clearly when you're not trapped inside them. He used to sit across from me at his kitchen table with his coffee and say, "You give too much of yourself to people who take it for granted." Claire Bear. I'd always brushed it off. He'd always looked at me like he knew I would. I reached into my bag. "I have something," I said. My mother frowned. "What do you mean you have something?" Uncle left me a letter. I found it in his desk 2 days after he passed, in an envelope with my name on it. He asked me to bring it today. My brother's jaw tightened. I unfolded the letter. My uncle's handwriting was blocky and practical, the handwriting of a man who wrote phone numbers on paper napkins and grocery lists on the backs of envelopes. "Claire, if you're sitting in that conference room right now, then things went about the way I expected. Your parents are telling you Derek needs the shop more than you do. Your brother is probably angry. Your sister-in-law is probably backing him up. And you're sitting there trying to figure out how to make everyone feel okay about something that is yours. Stop that. I'm leaving you the shop because you're the only one who ever cared about it as something other than money. You used to come in on Saturdays when you were 12 and hand me wrenches and ask me how everything worked. You called me from college to ask if I thought you should stay in nursing or switch to business. You were the one who sat with me through the chemo and pretended not to cry so I wouldn't feel bad. You are not a consolation prize, Claire. You are the person I trust most in this world, and the shop belongs with someone who will honor what it is. There is a second letter in this envelope, addressed to your parents and your brother. Read yours first, then read theirs. Then let Mr. Aldridge take over. All my love, Uncle Roy. I looked up. The room was very quiet. I pulled out the second envelope. It was sealed, and on the front in his handwriting it said, Patricia, Gerald, and Derek. My mother reached for it. I held it back. He asked me to read it, I said. Not you. Her hand dropped. I broke the seal. I have spent 63 years trying to be a fair man, and I have not always succeeded. But I have spent the last decade watching my family do something I cannot leave this earth without naming. You have taken Claire's patience, her generosity, and her good nature, and you have treated them like a resource that exists for your convenience. She paid Derek's rent twice that I know of. She covered the insurance deductible when he totaled his car, and you told your friends the car was stolen so no one would know. She canceled a vacation she'd saved for 2 years to fly home when your father had his procedure, Patricia, and when she arrived, you sent her to handle the logistics while you sat with him because you said you needed to be present, and she didn't mind doing the practical things. And she didn't say a word. She never says a word. I am not a wealthy man in most senses. But I have the shop and I have my savings, and I have the right to decide where those things go. They go to Claire, not because I love her more than I love the rest of you, but because she is the only one who never asked me for anything. She showed up. She paid attention. She remembered that I took my coffee black after my second cup and switched to half-calf afternoon. She brought me soup when I didn't want anyone to know I was sick, and she sat on my porch without talking when that was what I needed. That is worth more than blood obligation. If you contest this will, I want you to know that Mr. Aldridge has documentation. He has a letter I wrote to him 18 months ago detailing my intentions and my reasoning. He has records of every loan Derek took from me that was never repaid. He has the receipts I kept because I was an accountant's son, and I kept everything. Do not embarrass yourselves. Do not make Claire's grief harder than it already is. Let her have this one thing that someone gave her, without asking for something in return. I folded the letter with steady hands. This is a setup, my brother said. His voice had gone flat and tight, the way it got when he was cornered. You've been working on him for years, getting close to him, so he'd leave you everything. I looked at him for a long moment. I was with him when he got his diagnosis the first time, I said. I took him to the oncology appointments because he didn't want to drive himself, and he didn't want to worry anyone. I organized his medications and I researched his treatment options, and I made sure his fridge had food in it during the weeks he couldn't keep much down. And you know what I never thought once during any of that? That I was making an investment. My sister-in-law made a sound that was almost a laugh. You always do this. The martyr thing. What martyr thing? I asked. What exactly did I perform for an audience? He was sick, and I helped him. There was no audience. There was no performance. There were just Tuesday afternoons and soup from the deli he liked and me sitting in a waiting room reading a magazine. My father stood up. Claire, I'm asking you, as your father, to do the right thing here. Your brother has a family. He has responsibilities. He needs stability. I let the quiet sit for a second before I answered. Derek has had every opportunity you could give him, I said. You funded his first business. And his second, you co-signed a loan for the food truck he sold after 8 months. You paid his lawyer when he had the DUI. You've been giving him stability his entire life, and it hasn't stabilized anything. Maybe that's not his fault. Maybe it's not yours either. But it is not my problem to solve anymore. My mother's eyes filled. You're being cruel. I'm being honest, I said. Those aren't the same thing, even though in this family, they've always been treated like they are. Mr. Aldridge, my brother said, turning to the attorney with a new tack. Is there any provision for a family dispute? Any way to revisit the terms? You're welcome to contest the will, Mr. Aldridge said. However, I should inform you that your uncle filed a video statement at the time of signing, which is admissible as supporting documentation of his intent and his state of mind. He was thorough, he added, with a small note of something that sounded like admiration. My brother shoved back from the table. You want the shop, Claire? Fine. Run it. You don't know the first thing about managing employees or billing or inventory. I know how to learn, I said. He walked out. My sister-in-law followed. My parents sat for another moment, my mother looking at her hands, my father looking at the window like the answer might be outside in the parking lot. Finally, my father said, quietly, I hope you know what you're doing. I didn't say anything. He stood, helped my mother up, and they left without looking at me again. Mr. Aldridge passed me an envelope across the table. The keys, he said, and a USB drive with a copy of the video statement. If you'd like to have it. He asked me to give it to you. He also asked me to tell you that the senior mechanic, a man named Frank, has been with the shop for 19 years and knows where everything is. I held the envelope in both hands. Thank you, I said. He was a good man. He was, Mr. Aldridge agreed. He spoke about you often. I sat in my car for a long time before I drove anywhere. I didn't cry, exactly. I did the thing where you breathe very carefully and stare at a fixed point until the feeling passes through you instead of breaking you open. My uncle had taught me that, without meaning to, just by doing it in front of me enough times that I'd absorbed it. Then I drove to 318 Beaumont Road. The shop was closed for the week out of respect, but Frank was there, sweeping out the main bay. He was a broad man in his late 50s with grease under his fingernails that I suspected was permanent by now. He looked up when I pulled in, and something in his expression settled, like a question he'd been holding had just been answered. He left it to you, Frank said. It wasn't a question. He left it to me, I confirmed. Frank nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's right. We stood together in the bay for a while. Frank told me about the regular customers, the 3 mechanics on staff, the billing system my uncle had upgraded 2 years ago, the accounts receivable that was currently in decent shape. He showed me the office, which smelled like coffee and WD-40, and the particular mustiness of paper files that had never been fully digitized. On the wall behind the desk was a photograph, my uncle and me at my nursing school graduation, both of us squinting into the sun, both of us grinning like idiots. I hadn't known he'd framed it. I sat at the desk for a long time after Frank went home. The calls started that night. My mother first, then my father, then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my sister-in-law, calling from her work phone. The messages ranged from pleading to accusatory to a single text from my brother that just said, "You'll regret this." I read them all once and then I put my phone face down on my uncle's kitchen counter, in the house that was now also mine because he had added it to the estate transfer. A detail Mr. Aldridge had mentioned at the end that I hadn't fully absorbed until I was standing in the kitchen, looking at the same ceramic rooster my uncle had kept on the windowsill for as long as I could remember. He had thought of everything. That was so like him. He was a methodical man. He kept his tire pressure gauge in the same pocket every day. He had a system for loading the dishwasher that he would defend calmly and at length if challenged. He had clearly spent the last several years quietly, carefully arranging things so that when he was gone, no one could undo what he'd decided to do for me. I watched the video statement that night on my laptop, sitting in his armchair with a cup of coffee, the way I'd done 100 times while he sat across from me. He was in this same chair in the video, filmed in the living room with afternoon light coming through the window behind him. He looked good. This was before the second round of treatment, when he'd still had his color. He was wearing the flannel shirt I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. He looked directly at the camera and said, "My name is Roy James Hutchins. I am of sound mind and I am making this statement of my own free will with no pressure from any person. I am leaving my business, my property, and my savings to my niece Claire Hutchins because she has demonstrated over many years that she possesses the values and the character that I want associated with everything I've built. I want the record to show that this decision was not made in haste, was not made under the influence of illness, and was not made because of any estrangement from my other family members. It was made because Claire showed up. It was made because she is the person I trust, and it was made because she deserves something that belongs entirely to her." He paused, and then he smiled, the slow, crooked smile that I knew meant he was about to say something a little sideways. "Also," he said, "if Derek is watching this, I want him to know that I loved him, and I always will. And I also want him to know that the money he borrowed in 2019, and the money in 2021, and the money in 2022, added up to more than the truck I left him is worth, so I think we're about even. I laughed out loud at that in the empty room. It sounded strange. It sounded good. The next weeks were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated and easier in ways I had. The mechanics were cautious with me at first, politely doubtful in the way people are when they are too professional to say what they're actually thinking. Frank ran interference, as I suspected he had for years with vendors and contractors who came in expecting to deal with my uncle and found someone unexpected instead. I spent those first weeks learning everything I didn't know, which was extensive. I asked questions I was sure were obvious. I made mistakes with the billing software and had to call the vendor's helpline twice. I found my uncle's notes in a green binder in the second desk drawer, a running document he'd clearly been updating for at least 2 years, as though he'd been writing a manual all along knowing that someone would need it. There were tabs for everything: regular customers and their preferences, the suppliers he trusted and the ones he used only as a backup, and why, the employee schedules and the raise timeline, and a note that said, "Frank is due for a raise in April. Do not forget." The emergency contact list, the accountant's number, a sticky note on the inside cover in his handwriting that said, "You're going to do fine, Claire Bear. Call me if you have questions." Then below that, in smaller letters, that was a joke: "I'm dead. Call Frank." I cried more, reading that binder, than I had at any point in the previous month. I called Frank. My family attempted the contest. It lasted 63 days. The judge reviewed the video statement, the documentation Mr. Aldridge had compiled, the loan records, and the supporting letter my uncle had filed separately. The ruling was brief and unambiguous. The estate remained as directed. My brother was ordered to pay a portion of the legal fees. My parents called after the ruling. My father's voice was different than it had been in the conference room. Quieter, the kind of quiet that comes after something breaks, and the noise finally stops. He said he hoped I was doing okay. I said I was. There was a long pause, and then he said, "Roy always did think highly of you." I said, "I know. I thought highly of him too." We didn't say anything else meaningful, but we stayed on the phone for another 3 minutes before we said goodbye, and I thought that maybe that was something. My mother sent a card 2 weeks later. It said, "I am sorry for your loss. I know how close you were." I put it on the desk in the office next to the graduation photograph. My brother didn't reach out. I hadn't expected him to. I did hear through my mother that he and his wife had moved to her sister's place in Memphis, which meant something had shifted in their situation, though I didn't ask for details. I hoped he was okay. I meant that. I also knew that hoping someone was okay did not mean I had to keep subsidizing the ways they weren't. 6 months after the reading, I was sitting at the desk on a Thursday evening finishing up the accounts when Frank knocked on the office doorframe. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Place runs better than it ever has," he said, not looking at me, examining the ceiling in the way men of his generation did when they were paying a compliment they didn't want to make awkward. "I think you're being generous," I said. "I'm not generous," he said. "Ask anyone." He set one of the mugs on the desk and turned to go. "Frank," I said. He stopped. "He was proud of you too," I said. "He talked about you all the time. Said the place would have fallen apart 20 times over without you." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, gruffly, "Good coffee machine in the break room now." That was a good call. He went back out to the bay. I heard him tell someone else to quit leaning on the lift. I took my coffee out to the parking lot the way my uncle used to do in the evenings, standing at the edge of the lot, looking out at Beaumont Road while the last of the day's light went orange and flat. The sign above the garage still said Hutchins Auto in the same block letters it always had. My uncle had never seen a reason to change it. Neither did I. My phone buzzed. A text from a friend asking if I was still coming to dinner on Saturday. I texted back yes, and added that I'd bring the bread this time, the sourdough I'd been learning to make in my uncle's kitchen on Sunday mornings, which was the one indulgence I'd allowed myself in the middle of all the practical business of inheriting a life. There had been a moment, about 3 weeks after the reading, when I'd stood in the garage alone at 7 in the morning before anyone else arrived, and I'd thought about what my father had said. "You have your life sorted out. She doesn't need it," as though having things sorted out meant you didn't deserve more. As though stability was its own punishment. I'd thought about all the years I'd been the sorted out one, the capable one, the one who could handle it. How that capability had been used like a permission slip to ask more of me and give less. How I'd accepted that bargain for so long that I'd started to believe it was just how things worked, that being reliable meant being available to be depleted. My uncle had seen it differently. He'd seen it for what it was, and he'd done the one thing no one else in my family had ever thought to do. He'd decided that my reliability, my showing up, my years of attention, those things had value, real value, not sentimental, not abstract. The kind of value that got documented and signed in front of witnesses and defended in court if necessary. I finished my coffee and went back inside. There was still the quarterly filing to finish and a conversation to have in the morning with the parts supplier about the new contract. Frank had left a note on my desk about a customer who'd asked specifically for the owner and seemed like he might want to bring his fleet accounts over, which was the kind of thing my uncle had always said would come if you just did the work right and let the reputation build itself. I sat back down at the desk, under the graduation photograph, in the chair that still smelled faintly like the coffee and machine oil that had been my uncle's particular combination, and I got back to work. There's something people don't tell you about inheriting something earned. They talk about the legal part, the logistics, the family drama that comes with it. They don't talk about the quieter thing, the way you can feel someone's life in a space they shaped, the way their choices become your context. The way being trusted by someone who knew you completely feels different from being approved of by people who only knew the version of you that was useful to them. My uncle had known me. He'd known me since I was 12 years old, handing him wrenches on Saturday mornings. He'd known me through bad decisions and good ones. Through the years I'd stretched myself thin for people who didn't notice. Through the nights I'd doubted whether any of it was worth it. He'd known all of that, and he'd still decided, deliberately and completely, that I was the person he trusted most. That knowledge sat in my chest differently than any accomplishment I'd worked for on my own. It didn't replace anything. It didn't undo the years, but it settled something that had been unsettled for a long time. A question I hadn't known I was asking, answered in the most concrete, irrevocable, legally documented way possible. Every Sunday, I make coffee in my uncle's kitchen. I tend the tomatoes he planted along the back fence that I nearly killed in the first month before Frank told me they needed less water than I thought. I sit on the back steps in the mornings before I drive to the shop, and I watch the neighborhood come awake the way he must have watched it for 30 years. And I remember what he wrote in that letter. You are not a consolation prize. You never were. I chose to believe him.